Hello, it's me. I'm back again with another video. I've been playing a lot of Pauper lately. It's really fun because it's really cheap. You should get into it too. Today we're playing Black Sack though, which is a deck all about killing your own little guys. Here it is. We have a bunch of sack chaff, which are the guys who needs to die. Then we have the guys who eat them. And then we have the guy who eats them while they get eaten. Mortician Beetle. And I've learned this is an extremely aggressive deck. And it seems like a deck. It seems like a deck you can tinker a lot with. Smoothly go past that. Here's how it went. When I play a new deck, I do something kind of silly, and I don't read how to play the deck. I bring it and I try it out. I start with a swamp and a carrion feeder. In my mind, I need to dig deeper and find all my sack chaff, and then find a way to like combo off by making huge creatures with my sack outlets. So this carrion feeder isn't really here to be scary, it's here to be sacrificed later. My opponent plays a tapped land, I think it's a Cawgate, and names white with it. I play a supernatural stamina on my carrion feeder, which gives it +2/+0, and the next time it would die this turn, it returns to the battlefield tapped instead. This allows me to attack for 3, and then sacrifice my carrion feeder with village rights, drawing 2 cards, and then trigger my carrion feeder to come back tapped. I would prefer to have played more like little creatures, but this is also fine. I press 3 damage in and I draw 2 cards. That feels really good, honestly. I would come to learn that I'm playing too many village rights and too many corrupted convictions, which would kind of hurt my aggressive starts sometimes. My opponent plays a Sacred Cat, a 1/1 lifelinker that can come back from the graveyard. My opponent's playing a deck called Cawgates, which is all about using Basilisk Gate to make a creature huge and using Squadron Hawk to make a bunch of value. I attack for 1, my opponent wisely blocks, and I do what I did last turn, Supernatural Stamina, and then I sacrifice it with a Corrupted Conviction. I'm not being that aggressive, but I would like to see a deck that makes more card advantage than this right now. It's ridiculous. I put my Supernatural Stamina back onto the battlefield, and my opponent nicely puts it back into the graveyard and brings back the creature. And I remember to tap it. It's important that it comes back tapped. For his turn, my opponent will Island Cycler Lauren Reveal to find an island and put it into play. I feel like I've come a long way as a Pauper player now. I recognize all the like regular play patterns and everything that happens, and I'm very happy about that. I feel like I've actually learned a lot doing all of this, especially watching back my own matches. You learn a lot looking at yourself making mistakes. Next up, I play a Wedding Invitation. This is a one-off in the deck. When it comes into play, I draw a card, and I can tap and sacrifice it to make one creature unblockable. If that creature is a vampire, it gains the lifelink as well. It costs 2 mana as an artifact. Once again, I send the carrion feeder into death against the Sacred Cat, and I sacrifice it to draw 2 cards before damage, so my opponent doesn't gain a life, just to see if I can sneak 1 damage in there in case he doesn't block. And then I pass the turn, leaving 1 mana open. This deck doesn't have a lot of instant interaction that doesn't require you to have a creature in play, so that mana's not gonna do anything. My opponent plays the Mud Mage, drawing a card, discarding a card, and eventually it will turn into a 2/3 flyer. They discard a counterspell, and they do not play a 3rd land, but attack me for 1, and gain 1 because the Sacred Cat has lifelink. Having drawn this many extra cards and having all my lands, I feel very good, even though I have no pressure on the board to win with. And my opponent does have almost two creatures in play. And here it is, the Mortician Beetle, the all-star of this deck. It used to be a rare, and it got downshifted from a rare to a common, which is crazy. Then I pass the turn, leaving 3 black mana open, which is crazy. I'm supposed to have so many 1/1s. I run, 20 1/1s in my deck, and I only drew 2 so far. But I shouldn't complain too much when I'm playing against someone who's literally mana screwed. My opponent does find the 3rd land, and then attacks me for 1, again gaining 1 because it has lifelink. They found the land with the 2nd trigger of the Mud Mage, which is a saga, so it does something every turn. Next turn it will turn into a 2/3 flyer called Vector something. It's really cool. And here's another the Mud Mage. This really helps my opponent stabilize their hand. Here it got them out of the sticky situation of only having 2 lands in their starting hand. It really adds a lot of versatility to any deck it's in. That's why it's so popular. And then getting a 2/3 flyer at the end of the saga is really good, especially in Cawgates, as we'll see later. I will play the Peregrine Beckoner, but I will warp it out. It's a new Edge of Eternity cards, and one of the reasons I really wanted to try this deck, my friend showed me this card. When it comes into play, you choose another creature, it gets +2/+0, and if it dies, it comes back into play. Basically supernatural stamina. But then at the end of turn, it exiles itself, and you can play it on a later turn for its full cost. Here instead, I sacrifice it to the Convicted Corruption to draw another 2, meaning it's 3 mana for a, effect like supernatural stamina, and then also drawing additional 2 cards, which is really nice. You also notice I've put a +1/+1 count on my beetle. It gets a +1/+1 count whenever a player sacrifices a creature. Then I play Nested Shambler, a 1/1 for 1. When it dies, I create an amount of tapped squirrels equal to its power. This is a really good card. With the supernatural stamina, you can easily make up to 3 squirrels. On my opponent's turn, the Modern Age finally flips into the 2/3 Vector Glider. My opponent is down to 15, but 15 isn't a low life total, and now they have 2 blockers against my 1 beetle, which might be enough, who knows? With the Modern Age, they draw a card, and then they discard Prismatic Strand, which is a flashback spell, where you just have to tap a white creature, and then you prevent all damage from all sources of 1 color until end of turn. This is really good against something like me. And I didn't notice they discarded it. Now my opponent plays one of the cards that give the name to the deck, the Squadron Hawk. We'll see it in a moment. Squadron Hawk is really cool. When you play it, you find all the other Squadron Hawks in your deck and put them into your hand. You can combine this with Brainstorm, which allows you to draw 3 and put 2 back. Then you draw 3 and put 2 Squadron Hawks back. Then you just have to shuffle your deck. And basically you've turned Brainstorm into Ancestral Vision? Recall? I can't remember which is which. A free treasure cruise. There we go. I nailed it. And here's the Brainstorm. And that's a really good combo to generate a bunch of card advantage. Too bad I've generated much more already. My opponent was very nervous. They had borrowed this deck and they've never piloted it before. But to be fair, I've never piloted my deck before. But also I didn't borrow it. I did have the chance to sit down and just, fake a bunch of hands and try to kill a fake opponent. See how quickly I could take away 20 health when I sat at home. I play my 1 Unearth to bring back the Carrion Feeder. I feel like Unearth is really good in this deck because I can run 4 Carrion Feeders, but if I needed something else, the Unearth could get it. But I don't want to run too many Unearth because I'm already running a ton of spells. Then I warp another Peregrine Beckoner, giving my Nested Shambler +2/+0, and if it dies, it comes back. Now we have a very powerful turn. I use the Carrion Feeder to eat the Nested Shambler. The Nested Shambler makes as many tokens as it has power, so when it dies, it will make 3 squirrels. When it's sacrificed, I put a counter on the Mortician Beetle, and on the Carrion Feeder. Also, I want you to look at my very cute squirrel token. I have to hide it, but look how cute she is. And there's 3 of her. I try to draw my own tokens, I like that. The Nested Shambler comes back because of the Peregrine Beckoner thing, and then I sacrifice it again, gaining more counters on both my creatures and creating a 4th squirrel. And then I can eat all those squirrels and the Peregrine Beckoner to put another 5 counters on each of those 2 creatures. This makes the Mortician Beetle a 9/9, and with the Wedding Invitation, it's invited to go punch my opponent in the face because it becomes unblockable when I sacrifice it. Then I play the Black Fling, Rite of Consumption, to kill my opponent, and he forgets to use the Prismatic Strand in his graveyard to prevent all the damage, so I'm very happy. We both forgot about it, that's very lucky. It's game 2, my opponent goes first, and I'm realizing how slow of a version of this deck I'm playing. Playing 8 of those things that sacrifice a creature to draw 2 really slows me down. I start turn 1 with a Nested Shambler this turn, however, which is a much better start than before, where I used my creature that can sacrifice the others. This time it's actually the thing I want to sacrifice that's in play first. My opponent uses a Journey to Nowhere to exile it, and I have no way to sacrifice it in response, and because it's exile, I don't get any tokens from it. I could have played around this. I play an Infestation Sage for my turn and pass the turn, keeping 1 black mana open in case he tries the same thing again. My opponent casts a main phase Brainstorm for their turn, trying to fix their hand. I'm not entirely sure. Usually you need a Squadron Hawk first. And I just, in response, sacrifice my creature to draw 2 cards with a Village Rise. And it's not so much because you have to do it in response, it's mostly just to get it over with and get the turns going faster. And then I get my 1/1 B. Yay! Now, if my opponent had had a blue mana open, I would not have done it to make it faster, because then they could have a Spell Pierce to stop it, and that would be really bad. But because they only have a colorless mana, I feel safe to just play my spells and get it over with. My opponent uses the 1 colorless mana they have afterwards to cycle a Lorien Revealed, finding an island in their deck that they can play. This also allows them to shuffle away whatever cards they put on top of their deck with Brainstorm, thereby getting rid of cards they don't want and basically sort of like fixing their entire hand. This is a really powerful strategy with Brainstorm, which I use myself when I play my Tolarian Terror deck. It's my turn. The first thing I do is get in there with the B and deal 1 damage to my opponent, putting them down to 19. I don't have a 3rd land, so for this turn I will play an Infestation Sage and sacrifice it to a Corrupted Conviction, drawing 2 and getting a B. This allows me to draw my 3rd land, which I can put into play, and then play a Nested Shambler. That just shows how I can keep building a board while securing my draws, even though I'm only playing 17 lands in the deck. So far, I'm not being punished for it. So far. My board is just 3 1/1s. Of course, one of them makes another 1/1 when it dies, so it's not super threatening, but it is able to do some damage, while my opponent's board is still entirely empty, so I feel ahead. My opponent takes a little while and then plays The Modern Age. And there it is. This allows him, again, to draw a card and discard a card, and look for all those gates he needs to win the game. He discards a Deep Analysis, which has Flashback for 2 mana and 3 life. You draw 2 cards. It's a really good card to discard. My opponent is generating a whole lot of card selection, a whole lot of card value, but not really any pressure on the board, because that will take 2 turns to turn into a creature. And my opponent even flashbacks the Deep Analysis right away, losing 3 life to draw 2 cards. And I'm very happy about that, because I have 3 power on the board, so I'm putting him down to 13 this turn. Here we go, down to 13. Boop. You won't be able to see it because my camera shifted upwards during the match, which is kind of sad. But I'm going to play a Bloodthorn Vampire. It's a 2 mana creature that can sacrifice a creature to get +2/+2. And it's a 1/1. It's also a vampire, so it's really good with the Wedding Invitation, but it's also just presenting a lot of damage. If I sacrifice all my creatures and the token the Nested Shambler makes, this is a total of like 2, 6, 8 damage plus the 1, that's 9 damage. Meaning if I play 1 more 1/1 that can be sacrificed to make a 1/1, that's actually 13 and I'm presenting lethal. However, my opponent does have the Sacred Cat, which is a really good blocker you can throw in front of it to gain 1 life. He also discards another Prismatic Strand, and we'll have to see if he remembers to use it this game. Which I have a sneaky feeling he will, because last time I didn't notice, but this time he announced that he was putting it into a graveyard, so we were both very aware that it was in there, and that he would need that Sacred Cat in play to tap it to flashback it. To remind you, it prevents all damage from 1 color, meaning he can prevent all black damage. You can even see me this time. I have to go look in his graveyard to make sure I remember this card. I thought it was from his sideboard. I didn't realize it was in the main board. So this time I'm much more aware of it. I am a good Magic player. It's important to hype yourself up when you do well. Anyways, I proceed to attack with everything since I have technically lethal and I need to force that Prismatic Strand out of my opponent's graveyard somehow, or kill that 1 cat so he can't actually flashback the Prismatic Strands. My opponent realizes he has to block the vampire that's, down there. You can't actually see it right now, but it's a vampire down there. I have to sacrifice one of my creatures, otherwise my vampire will die to the cat. So I use a supernatural stamina on my nested shambler. That gives it 3 power. Then I can sacrifice it before damage, sadly, to pump my vampire into a 3/3 and get 3 squirrels out of it. I try to trade the cat with my opponent, but my opponent uses the prismatic strands to save the cat. And also preventing 2 damage to his face. My opponent tries to tell me my cat will die, but I remind them that, I sacrificed a creature, so it's actually a 3/3. And that's okay, sometimes there's a lot to keep track of. I play a carrion feeder, which is also a big threat, but it gets countered. Which is really sad, because I wanted it. At least I still have my vampire, and enough things to sack to present lethal again. My opponent still has the cat, so they can just block. And this time, they also flip the Mud Mage into a Vector Glider, so now they have 2 creatures to block with. So if Squadron Hawks is what gives the name Core to this deck, then Basilisk Gate is what gives it the gate in, Cawgates. The Basilisk Gate has, for 2 mana and tap it, you can give target creature +X, where X is the number of gates you control. So that's what my opponent wants, to have creatures in play he can pump with his land and then kill me with, or gain a shit ton of life off of the cat. My opponent tried to Journey to Nowhere my vampire, but I used supernatural stamina on it, and then I sacrificed it to itself. That way it remains in play, and it's still a big threat on the board. And that Journey to Nowhere doesn't target anything. My opponent then plays another the Mud Mage to fix their hand, looking for even more gates to make sure that when they start pumping their creatures, it will be lethal eventually. My opponent also discarded another prismatic strand to the second, the Mud Mage, so I have to get through that and the cat still. For my turn, I play a carrion feeder, and then I think for a little bit. I can't really attack with my flying creatures because my opponent has a 2/3 flyer, so it would just be throwing creatures away. I could attack with a squirrel or something, but in the end I decide all I want to attack with is the vampire. If it's not blocked, it can kill my opponent, but they can either use the prismatic strand to survive or just block with their cat. My opponent chooses to block with the cat. I have to sacrifice a squirrel to make my vampire into a 3/3, and I kill the cat. But that's not so bad for them, because the cat has an ability called Embalm, where you can exile it from your graveyard for 1 mana and create a token copy of it in play, except it's a zombie. And very importantly, it's still white, so you can still just tap it to play the flashback cost for the prismatic strand to prevent all black damage. For my opponent's turn, they use the Mud Mage to draw a card and then discard a card. The next thing he does is, apparently he's low on cards, so he's going to play Lorien Revealed, but not Island Cycle it, actually draw the 3 cards from casting it. This is a revolutionary use of this card. Imagine it's not an island, but actually a draw spell. That's crazy. My opponent then uses 1 mana to activate the Embalm on the cat to create a 1/1 cat token with lifelink. I thought it cost more than 1 mana, but I was wrong, so I had to reread the card. But even worse, my opponent also has drawn their own tokens. Look at this beauty! Look at these beauties! Then my opponent passes the turn, and for my turn, we're gonna have to go full turbo. So, in Edge of Eternity, a new card came out, the Paragri Beckoner. It has the mechanic Warp. You can't see it here because it's off screen, but I use Warp to give my vampire +2/+0, and if it dies, it comes back tapped. Then I warp out another Paragri Beckoner, giving the first Paragri Beckoner +2/+0, and if it dies this turn, it comes back tapped. Then I sacrifice it to the vampire, but because of that, it comes back, and then it gives the other Paragri Beckoner +2/+0, and if it dies, it comes back. So both of them constantly make each other come back, and I constantly sacrifice them to the carrion feeder and to the vampire, making them both into 10,000 creatures, attacking my opponent for 20,000 damage. Funny enough, he blocks both of them as they don't have trample, then taps the cat to prevent all damage from black sources this turn. The cat also has lifelink, so I attacked for 20,002, but it ended up with my opponent gaining 1 life. Then I think that because I warped my 2 Paragri Beckoners, I have to exile them so I can play them on a later turn. This is incorrect, which I will be reminded of later. Then I made a YouTube short about it. It's very funny. I wish you would go watch and like it. On my opponent's turn, the Mud Mage flips into another Vector Glider, and my opponent has 3 blockers since they have another cat with lifelink. Well, not another one. It just survived because it prevented all black damage. Now, the thing about the Mud Mage flipping into the Vector Glider is that you exile it and then play it again. So it needs to have haste if it should attack the turn it comes in, so it can't attack. My opponent counts the gates. He has 6 gates, so he uses the Basilisk Gate to tap it and give one of the Vector Gliders, importantly the one that can attack, +6/+6 this turn. Which means he can attack me for 8 flying in the air this turn. Flying in the air this turn is a silly sentence. He could have also buffed the cat to gain a bunch of life, but since I have a 10,000 on the board, that's probably not that important. The vampire outside the screen lost its buff, while the carrion feeder keeps it because it puts +1/+1 counters on it. The other one just gets buffed. My opponent attacks, and I do have flyers, but also have 20 life, so I just sacrifice 8 life. I would rather keep my flyers so I can sacrifice them to buff my vampire, presenting lethal damage. Then my opponent plays the Outlaw Medic, a 2-mana 1/3 with lifelink that when it dies, you draw a card. This is also really good with the gates because it can stop aggro and gain you a bunch of life, and you also draw a card, so it's, basically a free card. For my turn, I sacrifice one of my scrolls to a Corrupted Conviction to draw 2 cards, because I have to find some way to get in with my 10,000. I would love one of those black flings, but I get an Izumi Linebreaker, which is another 1/1 that I can sacrifice to get a 1/1. I attack for 10,000. My opponent blocks with the Medic Outlaw. There's also some action going on downstairs where my vampire is blocked by the cat. And I kill both of them. I do have to sacrifice a creature to make sure my vampire doesn't die. Both of my opponent's creatures die, but they both have lifelink, so my opponent went to 18 after that. It's my opponent's turn. My deck can make 3 kinds of different tokens. Flying 1/1s, outlaws that tap to buff another creature, or just good old squirrels. My opponent sees I'm at 12 and they have 2 Basilisk Gates they can activate, giving each of their creatures +6/+6, which would be 16 flying damage to kill me. My opponent does start actually counting it out and putting on the gates, buffing the creatures, and I'm kind of confused because I have 2 1/1s with flying, and if I was a nicer person, I would be like, hey, you do remember my tokens have flying? But honestly, I also thought my opponent just knew. But it would not be the first time that someone saw an Infestation Sage die make a 1/1 to block a flying creature to win the game. My opponent attacks, I immediately block, and my opponent goes, right, they have flying, which is something you need to just remember about it. I feel a bit bad because it's my custom tokens, and I'm unsure whether that might have caused the confusion, but I really don't think so. My opponent then concedes because, he has no way to stop my 10,000 swinging back. It's my second match of the day, and we're up against Olaf on Dimir Faeries, and I have a grudge against this guy. He's beaten me with this deck so many times over my course of playing Pauper. On the other hand, turn 1 I play a 1/1, turn 2 I play a 1/1, and he hasn't played anything yet. So it's going great. We have our opponent down to 19, and this seems like an aggressive start. But I know the Dimir Faeries, and I'm not happy to play against it. On my opponent's end step, I play a Corrupted Conviction, but they have a blue mana open, and he plays a Spell Pierce. I can't pay 2, so effectively I just killed my own creature and didn't draw anything. At least I still get a 1/1 flyer. However, on my turn, my opponent has no blue mana open, which means I can just swing for 2 and not worry too much. And then I know this Carrion Feeder will resolve. Sadly, I don't have anything else to use the 2 untapped mana for, so I just have to pass the turn. My opponent then Island cycles a Lauren Revealed, so he's using his mana very efficiently, and I'm kind of just floating some mana for a turn, which is not great when you're an aggressive deck. My opponent then untaps and passes the turn. My opponent has 2 blue mana open, which is either a counterspell or Spellstutter Sprite, so I warp in the Pedigree Beckoner. It has a mana cost of 5, so Spellstutter Sprite can't counter it, and a counterspell would use all the blue mana. You can see here my opponent does have the counter spell to counter it, and that's fine. I didn't really need to sack anything this turn. I wouldn't get much out of it except another 2 damage. So this allows me to also guarantee I can resolve another Infestation Sage on this turn. I've played against this opponent with this list many times before, and I am 100% sure he doesn't run any sweepers in his main deck, so I don't mind deploying a whole shit ton of creatures right away. There's also not a lot of sweepers in Pauper, I've come to learn. There's Drown and Soar, which gives everything -2/-2. My opponent plays the Modern Age. We will never get tired of seeing that card over and over and over. The Modern Age allows him to discard a Snuff Out, which can only destroy non-black creatures. So it's really good for him that he get those out of his hands, since, you know, I only have black creatures. Except the Squirrel tokens, I guess they're just green. And the Mercenary tokens are red, but they're not worth snuffing out. This reminds me back in the day when I played Mono Black, and both Terra and Shriekmaw was in standard. Good times. Alright, before combat I play a Snuff Out on my Infestation Sage, giving it +2 attack, just so I can attack for a little bit more, and I swing in for 6. My opponent has to consider what they want to use the removal spell on. He has a Cast Down, which he targets on the Carrion Feeder, which makes the most sense. That will in the long run be the most threatening creature. And using it on the Infestation Sage before the Supernatural Stamina resolves could also have been good, but it's definitely the right call to kill the, thing that grows. It also prevents me from sacrificing my Infestation Sage and creating a 1/1 and getting it back. And I play nothing else for the turn and pass the turn. My opponent is still staring down 3 attackers and is at 9 life, so it is a clock. However, he does have a really good blocker in the form of a Gurmag Angler. This has a 5/5 for 7 mana, but it has Delve. You can exile cards in your graveyard to pay the generic cost of it. So that's how he can put down a huge creature for pretty cheap. It's my turn. I play my Wedding Invitation. It draws me a card and can make a creature unblockable for 1 turn. And then I play another Infestation Sage. I'm very good at drawing those this turn. I attack for 3, and my opponent blocks 1, taking 2, giving me another insect token. I really need some sort of draw spell and or a sack outlet to really push this board to become dangerous, especially with the Wedding Invitation. Any Carrion Feeder or any Bloodthorn Vampire would be lethal and unblockable. For my opponent's turn, he flips the Modern Age into a Vector Glider, and then plays a Deep Analysis, drawing 2, which is very bad for me. He now has 2 blockers, one of them even flying against all my little sack chaff. And I need some sort of actual threat, preferably one that's not counterable. To actually draw one of my sack creature, draw 2 here. First, I attack for 4. I know both of them will be blocked, which is kind of a problem, but the good thing is that I can sacrifice one of the blockers to draw 2. The bad thing is, and I should have predicted this, it will be countered by a Spellstutter Sprite. Spellstutter Sprite is one of the most powerful cards in all of Pauper, or Standard, or whatever it's in. It's a 1/1 with Flash for 2 mana that counters a spell that has equal to or less mana cost than the amount of Faeries you have in place. Usually it counters a 1-drop or a 2-drop, but in a Faeries deck it can counter almost anything. And in Pauper, there's a lot of cheap spells. My opponent attacks me with the Gurmag Angler and I go down to 15. Angler is kind of a big problem. I have no removal in my main board that can take it out. At best, I could probably use 2 Supernatural Staminas to trade with it. At least it's not back blocking, so I can still swing in this turn. And maybe I can get my opponent killed because he only has 5 life left. And without a big yeah, I guess everyone saw this coming. That's his second Gurmag Angler. And I'm at 15. This is starting to look bad. I only have 4 1/1, 3 1/1s. But at least they all get to attack. My opponent blocks 2 of them. And I can use a Village Rite to try and draw 2. And this time, it resolves. I actually get to kill my own creature to draw cards and not just kill it. This has been such a winning day when I finally resolve a spell. And then I get a 1/1. There's a good chance my opponent has no counter magic left. He only has 1 card in hand and did let that resolve even though it draws me 2 cards. So if I can just find like a Rite of Consumption or a way to buff my little flyers, then maybe I can win the game. For now, those Gurmag anglers are coming at me, putting me down to 5 by swinging for 10. This game is about to end, and I'm not entirely sure who's gonna win. Except, you know, this is me from the future. And I already know, but I'm not gonna spoil it. For my turn, I make my bee unblockable. Then I attack with my bee. My opponent can't block, so I buff it with a supernatural stamina, making it a 3-1. My opponent considers what to do about the 3-1 bee, because I could have a Rite of Consumption in hand to kill him with. Because if the bee has 3 powers, does 3 damage and shoots for 3. But if the supernatural stamina fails to resolve, it will only have 1 power, so my opponent chooses to counter it. That way negating both 2 damage I would have done extra right now, but also in case I have the Rite of Consumption in hand, which is just sacrifice a creature, deal damage equal to its power, you gain that much life. My opponent goes down to 3, and I can see the writing on the wall. Since those 2 Gurmag anglers are gonna come in and kill me now, and I only have 1 blocker, I scoop it up. The last game was really close, but I feel like my deck isn't being explosively aggressive enough. This time I start with a Mortician's Beetle, which is the one that gets +1/+1 counter whenever a player sacrifices a creature. Then for my second turn I get to play another Mortician's Beetle and a Nested Shambler, which is probably all my most powerful cards. 2 cards that get bigger whenever I sacrifice something, and something that can make a lot of tokens fast. This is only turn 2. I attack for 1, putting my opponent down to 19. My opponent cycles a Lorien Reveal to find his second island, and now he's staring down 2 Mortician's Beetle that can grow and a Nested Shambler that can explode the amount of counters on them. I'm not totally aware of what's gonna happen next, but I think my opponent knows, and they have to think, what is my next play? They play an island to keep open a counter spell and or a spell stutter sprite. It's my turn. And all I need right now is a sack outlet, then I can sack my Nested Shambler, the token it makes, and both my Mortician's Beetle will become 6/6. I try to play the Bloodthrown Vampire. I know it's gonna get countered, so I put it into the graveyard and see the counter spell. I attack for 3, putting my opponent down to 16. I was trying to play around a spell stutter sprite here, that's why I play a 2-cost creature instead of trying to play something that costs 1 mana. My opponent simply plays a land and passes the turn, keeping up interaction, trying to stay alive. I play an Izumi Linebreaker, which is more sack chaff that I can sacrifice to make tokens, and then I try to resolve my Carrion Feeder. My opponent knows if this resolves, a lot of things are going to happen, but it does resolve, which I'm very happy about. And now we're going to see and me learn how aggressive this deck is. I attack with everything. My opponent declares no blockers, but before damage, I want to sacrifice my Izumi Linebreaker to the Carrion Feeder, putting a +1/+1 counter on it and both of my Mortician's Beetle, and create a 1/1 token. Before the token is created, my opponent tries to destroy the Carrion Feeder with a cast down. I almost let it resolve, but then I remember I should sacrifice this Nested Shambler, get a squirrel, and then I can sacrifice that squirrel, and each of those sacrifices will put a counter on each Mortician Beetle. And then I also remember, you know, this Carrion Feeder, it doesn't say another creature, it can sacrifice itself, which will put yet another counter on each of my Mortician's Beetle. So they got 3 counters each, became 4/4s, and swing in for 8, putting my opponent to 8. Then my opponent plays a Brainstorm, because they have to find something that stops the lethal I have on board now. With 2 4/4s and a mercenary token, my opponent's gonna need a huge creature to block here. My opponent puts 2 cards back on the top of his library, and then puts the Brainstorm into his graveyard. He's actually cast a lot of spells, which allows him to this turn exile his entire graveyard to cast the Gurmag Angler. It's bigger than both of my creatures and can start blocking, but my sideboard has the Accursed Marauder, that makes my opponent sacrifice a creature, me too, and both my Beetle gets +2, and it's lethal. I'm starting to realize that this is an aggro deck. I wasn't entirely sure what the deck was about before, I just understood it had like a lot of sack in it. So I have mulligan for this Mortician's Beetle to play on turn 1. However, I'm not going first this time, and our opponent sideboarded in more removal, like this Extract a Confession that makes me sacrifice a creature. I've also sideboarded in this Nihil Spellbomb. It can both ruin my opponent's day if he tries to cast more Gurmag Anglers, and it can also get rid of Sneaky Snacker, even though I haven't seen it at all today. I am 100% sure it's in my opponent's deck, because he's shown it to me every other time we've played against each other. However, I have a problem. I have no second land, and I have to crack this Nihil Spellbomb just to draw a card, and then do the saddest thing in the world and pass the turn with just one land in play, and discard to hand size. I discard a Bloodthrone Vampire since it's a 2-mana creature and I can't actually play it yet. My opponent's now up to 4 lands while I'm stuck on 1, and plays the Mud Mage to further improve the quality of his hand. This deck, in spite of only playing 17 lands, really wants 2 mana, and you should always mulligan to find it. That is something I learned throughout this tournament. I do get my second land off the top afterwards, and then I can play another Bloodthrone Vampire, which resolves. If I'm lucky, I can play a bunch of Sack Chaff, and that'll be big enough to kill my opponent, even though I'm this far behind on lands right now. Next, my opponent plays a Thorn of the Black Rose, which is a 1/3 Death Toucher for 4 mana, but it also gives you the Monarchy when it enters, making you the Monarch, which means at the end of the turn, if you have it, you draw a card. So my opponent ends his turn and draws a card. I only have a 1/1 to get past this 1/3. However, I did sideboard in the Accursed Marauder, which makes each of us sacrifice a creature. My opponent sacrifices the blocker, and I attack for 1 and get the Monarchy. I forget the part about Accursed Marauder where it says both players have to sacrifice a creature, and I haven't sacrificed it yet, so my opponent nicely reminds me, and I put it into the graveyard. I think for a bit, because I want to revive it, but then I realize if I actually revive it with a Supernatural Stamina and bring it back, I would just have to sacrifice it right away again. So here I am trying to do it, and then I'm like, no, wait, that's a bad idea, because it would just die again. However, I did get the Monarchy, which means I can draw an extra card at the end of my turn, and my opponent has no way to steal it back unless he plays a haste creature, which he can. However, on his turn, the Mud Mage flips into a Vector Glider, and Vector Glider has flying, so it can very likely steal the Monarchy back as soon as it can attack on the next turn. My opponent Island Cycles Lorien Reveal, because that's what you do when you play Pauper. You Island Cycle it. Playing it is insane. Then my opponent plays the Gurmag Angler. I really wish I could use the Nihil Spellbomb to get rid of the graveyard, but you know, we can't have it all. So for my turn, I try to play another Accursed Marauder, making both of us sacrifice a creature. The only problem is it doesn't get rid of the Gurmag Angler, because my opponent can just sacrifice the Vector Glider. So in response to the trigger, I want to give it Supernatural Stamina so it'll come back, but my opponent plays a Spellstutter Sprite, which, since he only has 1 fairy, he can counter a spell that costs 1, which is the Supernatural Stamina. And that would also give him a 1/1 he can sacrifice. So now I didn't even get rid of the Vector Glider. This has been an awful turn. And then I play another Nihil Spellbomb, which just arrives at the absolutely worst time. I had to crack the first one to dig for a land, and the second one arrives after the Gurmag Angler. I'm not sure if the Nihil Spellbomb was actually the right thing to sideboard in here. I haven't seen any Sneaky Snackers, so maybe Graveyard Hate isn't that good in this matchup. My opponent attacks with the Vector Glider, I take 2, and he steals back the Monarchy to draw another card this turn. And my opponent is a control player, or at least a slower player with interaction. So I'm in a really bad position here. If it was a casual game, I might start considering conceding. But since it's the last of a best of 3 where it's 1/1, I will keep playing, because if I have any out, I will want it. My opponent plays the Mud Mage, draws and discard, and then passes the turn. If I get 2 Peregrine Beckoners, I can sacrifice them infinitely to make my 1 vampire as big as I want. But however, it will still just be blocked. I play Mortician's Beetle, which is a good start to at least get back into the game. My opponent has 3 cards in hand, so it's gonna be difficult, but I can exile his graveyard to draw another card. I do have a Peregrine Beckoner in hand. I could have warped out this turn, but there's no point in it. I will just gain 1+1/+1 counter on the Mortician's Beetle if I do. So I'd rather keep it in hand in case I draw another one to go infinite with. Now I have 2 creatures that could become infinitely big if I did it. My opponent takes his turn, draws a card, and then passes, and then draws a card for the Monarchy. it's looking really bad for me because my opponent probably has a lot of interaction in their hand. But I warp out the Paragry Beckoner, and then I have to think because there's a good chance my opponent has a removal spell and will use it. He uses a Brainstorm to go look for an answer for the Paragry Beckoner. It is still on this stack, so I haven't announced what it will target yet. So a removal spell won't be used right now. However, it could be countered even though it's warped. And if it's countered, it just goes directly to the graveyard instead of exile, so I can play it on a later turn. However, it does resolve, and I try to target my Bloodthrown Vampire, giving it +2/+0. And if it dies, it comes back this turn. My opponent responds by casting down the Bloodthrown Vampire, and I respond by sacrificing it to draw 2 cards, and my opponent responds to that with a Dispel, which is a 1-mana spell that counters an instant, and Village Rite is an instant. So in the end, I lost my creature, didn't draw anything, and lost a bunch of cards. I'll play another Village Rite, sacrificing my Paragry Beckoner, since I can't play it from the exile, so it's better to have it in the graveyard. I also draw 2 cards and put a counter on my Mortician's Beetle. But then I just have to pass, because it's just a 2/2, and I'm staring down a Gurmag Angler and a Vector. I remember that the Mortician's Beetle still should get a second counter from when I sacrificed the Bloodthrown Vampire. It was sacrificed as part of an additional cost to a spell, even though that spell was countered. My opponent attacks for 7, but he plays an Unexpected Fangs, which is a 1 black mana instant that puts a +1/+1 counter on target creature and a lifelink counter, so I take 8 damage, and my opponent gains 8 life. My only way out of this seems to be my infinite combo, but even if I get it right now, it could be blocked by the other Vector Glider that's in play. I have a Vampiric Link in my sideboard, which is a much worse version of this card, but I didn't get my hands on any Unexpected Fangs yet, so I can't put it in. Then my opponent plays the Modern Age, and you know what it does? Draw and discard. And there it is! The Sneaky Snagger. My sideboard wasn't awful, I was just unlucky with the way we draw our cards, like in what timing. He gets this Sneaky Snagger directly into play, and I feel like this might be my last chance to win the game. I play out on Mortician's Beetle, I wait a moment just in case it gets countered, and then I play out on Nezumi Linebreaker. I know my opponent has 2 mana open, so they could counter something. They counter the Nezumi Linebreaker with another Spellstrutter Sprite. They have 2 Faeries in place, so they can easily counter it. Even if I had instant removal, which I don't. I do have 4 Defile in my sideboard, and maybe I should have brought them in against this deck, but it's really hard to find that out once you know, I don't have the experience yet. But I'm really glad I'm watching this back. I feel like making these videos is really improving me as a Pauper player. I don't think a lot of people get the chance to do this. And then in comes the Gurmag Angler and a bunch of Vector Gliders. I know the writing's on the wall, but if I can find 2 Paragry Beckoners, I can't possibly steal the game? Probably not. I block, and then I sacrifice my creature to draw 2 cards, putting another counter on my other beetle. So right now I have to hope both of those are Paragry Beckoners, and that I can get a sack outlet and a land, and my opponent has no interaction in hand. Then I could make a creature that's infinitely big and attack with it, but I also somehow need my opponent to not block. My opponent plays Lorien Revealed finally, and draws another 3 cards. So he only has 0 mana open. He plays another land though. Oh, he has 2 mana open, which is really bad for me. I think this would be a good time to actually concede, but you know, let's just play it out. I sacrifice my beetle, ruining my 1 chance at winning, because it didn't draw the combo I needed, so why not see what's on top of my deck and see if I can win. Now I have a stacked hand, but only 6 life. My opponent's at 25 and has everything. I played a Carrion Feeder, and if I had a way to make it huge, then this Rite of Consumption I'm going to play now would do a lot more damage than just the 1. My opponent reads the Rite of Consumption. He does find it amusing, because, you know, he sees how he could have won, but he has the Spell Pierce. I play another 2, deal 1 damage, and concede the game. Having played a few matches with the decks, I'm starting to understand what it is. It's an explosive aggro deck that can also finish with a huge dirtly creature and a Rite of Consumption if I'm lucky. This game, I get to start off by playing a land and playing a Mortician Beetle. Also, I've gone first every game today, and I'm loving it. My opponent is Austin, and I know what Austin's playing. She loves goblins, so she's going to be playing a goblin combo deck. So I have to kill her before this goblin combo can resolve. And I have a second Mortician Beetle, and I have an Infestation Sage. This matchup is what really helps me learn what this deck is about, because I'm worried that I can't kill her fast enough before I get comboed to death. And that teaches me how to mulligan for an aggressive start and go face, instead of keeping these hands that just have 1/1s that don't grow just to sack them to draw cards. It's better to have the cards that can become big and deal a lot of damage. My opponent plays a Rakdos Canarium, so she has to return another land to her hand, and it enters tapped. So that's just 3 turns where I have had to fight no interaction, and I have my third Mortician's Beetle, and I'm pretty sure that's a Carrion Fear. I can't see it because it's off camera, sadly. I need to be better at installing the camera so it actually films what I need. I sacrifice the Infestation Sage, putting a counter on every other creature, and then I sacrifice that bee as well to put another counter on everything. And then I have 4 3/3s on turn 3. This is the kind of hand you want with this deck. Rite of Consumption, the Paragree Beckoner combo, they're all fun and good, but I think this is what made the deck popular. I swing for 6, my opponent's at 13, and I have 12 power on the board. Any sack creature will make this board lethal. I don't know if this deck is actually popular, but I could see it really bringing the pace of the game up, even though Pauper is actually an extremely fast game, I've learned. You think playing with only commons would make the game slower, but between all the Tolarian Terrors, the Rakdos Burns in this deck, and the Elves, you can go extremely fast, and you need the correct answers for every matchup. In this case, it would be my opponent needing a lot of cheap removal, or some way to kill a bunch of 3/3s, which doesn't really exist in Pauper. In the end, my opponent decides to play a Putrid Goblin, which is a 2/2 Goblin with Persist, and this is part of her combo, which she has to sacrifice it infinitely. But we won't get to see it this match, because I play some Sack Fodder, immediately sacrifice both of them. There's now 4 creatures I can sacrifice to put 4 counters on all my creatures, and I swing for way more than lethal. GG! I'm surprised at my deck. I didn't know it was this fast, and I'm starting to learn that I need these hands to actually win my games. My opponent starts by playing a fetch land and putting a land into play tapped. I don't have a Mortician's Beetle this time around, but I do have a Infestation Sage that I play turn 1, which makes it a lot nicer. I also don't have to cut out the shuffling, because my opponent let me play while she shuffled her deck, which is very nice. It's not the way to play a competitive event, but it's nice. She has the Putrid Goblin for turn 2, and I'm kind of worried because she could just start comboing very soon. So I attack for 1, hoping she'll block, because I have a Supernatural Stamina to give it +2 attack. And she does block, so I buff my creature trading. I don't exactly know how her deck works, but I'm pretty sure that if the Goblin has a minus counter on it, it can't actually combo off. So this saves me some time, just in case she had the whole thing in the beginning. I also get my Infestation Sage back, and I get a 1/1, and then I play my Mortician Beetle. My opponent then plays a Chromatic Star, which is a 1-mana artifact that you can pay a mana, tap, sacrifice it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, and when it leaves the battlefield, or when it's sacrificed, when it goes to the graveyard, you draw a card. There's a lot of these cards in Pauper where you it's an artifact that comes into play, draws a card, or when it leaves the battlefield, draws a card. But they usually cost 2, and I never thought about using the Chromatic Star as a tool to draw even more cards in the same way as Echo Wellspring or Kyrogen Relic. There's so much to know about Pauper, and I love learning all of it. Anyways, I attack with all my 1/1s. My opponent, having seen what the Mortician's Beetle can do in game 1, decides to block the Mortician's Beetle. She probably knows she won't get the trade, but it is the thing that would deal the most damage. I play a Village Rite, sacrificing my Infestation Sage. This triggers my Beetle to get a counter, and that will save it from death from the Putrid Goblin, which is currently a 1/1 because it has a -1/-1 counter. I also get another little bee that I can put into play, and it's also very cute. I should have drawn it with a thicker pen so you could see it. It's just kind of whited out here, sadly. My draws from the village rights were on the other end really good. I got my 3rd land, which enables me to play this Nested Shambler and this Carrion Feeder. With a Nested Shambler and a Carrion Feeder, I can start sacking everything and making my creatures huge. And if I have a way to give my Nested Shambler more power, like the Supernatural Stamina or a Peregrine Beckoner, it will go nuts. My opponent uses the Eviscerator's Insight to sacrifice the Chromatic Star, and here you can see I'm realizing you don't actually have to sacrifice the Chromatic Star to its own ability to draw a card. So my opponent will draw 3 cards off of sacrificing it. And I think she just has to find the combo as soon as possible, because my board is starting to look really threatening with both the Carrion Feeder and the Mortician's Beetle in play. However, she has nothing on board, and I think she needs like 3 pieces of the combo and a total of 5 mana to do it like out of an empty hand. So she just has to play this Putrid Goblin and hope that next turn she can probably combo off. I don't know if she actually can. She plays another Rakdos Canarium, returning a land to her hand. And I'm realizing this Putrid Goblin, it probably doesn't want to block, because if it blocks, it dies, it gets the minus counter, and then it can't be used to combo kill me. So while it is a pretty good blocker, I don't think it will actually block this turn, because it's not really a creature, it's a combo piece. I play another Infestation Sage that I can sacrifice to my Carrion Field to gain a bunch of counters on my creatures. I attack with everything, and now I have to see, will my opponent block or not? I don't know if that is actually a correct answer. It depends on whether she could even stop me when I next turn attack with the same mass of creatures. Like, if she blocked and it helped her survive an extra turn, could she combo out of hands without having a Putrid Goblin without a minus counter on? I don't know. I really want to try the Goblin combo deck. I've almost assembled it. It could be really fun to play it. I just wish it was like a top tier deck. But then again, I don't think this Mono Black Sack deck is a top tier deck. After counting it out, my opponent realizes I don't have lethal and chooses to not block. So I start the train of sacrificing all my little guys to my Carrion Feeder, putting counters on Mortician Beetle and Carrion Feeder. I do it one by one nicely here, because my opponent has 1 mana open, so in case they have some sort of shock or something, I really want to make sure that I don't sacrifice everything, and then they use a removal, because then I would have lost, a bunch. I think it's important to do it one at a time. So here I end up attacking for a shit ton, putting my opponent to 4, and then I have a Rite of Consumption, the Black Fling. I sacrifice my Mortician Beetle, and my opponent dies. And now I know what this deck is. This deck is a sort of weird combo aggro deck, and I have to mulligan a lot harder than I ever did in any of my matches. My opponent did, I'm not sure if my opponent had a combo win next turn, but she is dead on board. So far we've won 2 and lost 1, so I'm feeling good. I'm playing against Freya on a bouncy deck, which means we'll see Karajan Relic going into the battlefield and being blinked back up to the hand. My turn 1 is a Mortician's Beetle, and I follow it up with some Sack Chaff in the form of Infestation Sage, and I immediately sacrifice it, drawing 2 cards and putting a counter on my Mortician's Beetle. This is a very good aggressive start, giving me my 1/1, putting a counter on the Mortician's Beetle, which I already said, attacking for 2, putting my opponent to 18, and we're being aggressive, and I like it. Now, I did draw my cards out of order because I attacked and then I drew, and I need to work on that because next week it's going to be like competitive play. My opponent then plays a Refurbished Familiar, making me discard a card. Luckily, I don't need that many lands to win, so I will just discard a land. So the bad thing here is the Refurbished Familiar can block my Mortician's Beetle, and it will kill it. The good news is I have this Peregrine Beckoner, which can give my Mortician's Beetle +2/+0, and make it come back if it dies. I then attack, and my opponent blocks the Mortician's Beetle, which dies and comes back with a +1/+1 counter. This isn't great. I would have preferred to have had some way to sack the Peregrine Beckoner, such like as a Village Rights or the like, or just have had a Diagraph Ghoul to sacrifice my token, putting another counter on the Mortician's Beetle, so I could trade it well with the refurbished familiar instead of me having to lose the count on my Mortician's Beetle by it dying and coming back. I still feel like I'm in the driver's seat. I keep playing creatures. I have no sack outlet, so it's not exploding. But all my opponents played is a Prophetic Prism, which just draws a card and can filter mana. It's really good for her because she's lacking colors of mana to do things. But I have 4 creatures in play now, and if I draw a way to sacrifice some creatures, that Mortician Beetle can get out of hand fast. And while I only played 1 creature, my opponent just plays a Blood Fountain, making a Blood Clue and nothing else. I spent 5 mana bringing my Peregrine Beckoner back, giving my Beetle +2/+0, but it immediately gets shut down by Galvanic Blast, which the red mana came from the Prophetic Prism, so, you know, it did its job. Then I attack for 3, putting my opponent down to 11, and the Peregrine Beckoner now stays in the battlefield as a 4/5, so that's really good. Sometimes you have to play at your own speed. It's very important to keep the game in your head at your speed. My opponent here uses a Sea of Synod to generate a white mana, playing a Glinthawk, and then returns the Sea of Synod to her hand, recasting it. But it just feels like an untap the way she does it. Then she draws a card to place an Ancient Den. And I get why, because it didn't feel like playing a land when she recast the Sea of Synod, so I have to sit there for a second, point it out, and then she also remembers herself. And this is also when I realized that my opponent is mana screwed this whole game and has been fishing and digging for lands, and that's why I'm so far ahead. Then again, I've drawn almost too many lands. I swing with everything, and my opponent then blocks the 1/1 flying token, which is smart, because blocking anything else, you would either lose the Hawk or just, you know, there would still be the same creature. I use a Corrupted Conviction to sacrifice my token to draw 2 cards, and I deal 6 damage, bringing my opponent down to, I think, 5. Yeah, 5. Good, thank you, overlay. And then I immediately play 2 Blood-Thrown Vampires. These are very good. These are the sack outlets I've been looking for. And because I have 2 creatures that make creatures when they die, they both represent lethal. And so does the Peregrine Beckoner, but alongside another 1/1. My opponent plays a Kyrian Relic to draw a card, and it looks very, very dire for her at this point. This is at a point where you could concede, but she has 1 out. Her out is, however, relying on me making a mistake. And sometimes that's disrespectful, but when you're playing for, you know, actual prizes, you gotta go for it. You gotta see if your opponent makes that crucial mistake, as I have earlier. I attack with everything. She blocks my Peregrine Beckoner, and that will be 4 damage. So I try to sacrifice my Peregrine Beckoner to one of the vampires, which would be lethal. And then my opponent, in response, shoots it with a Galvanic Blast. Of course, I sacrifice the vampire to the other vampire, which then makes it 5 damage. I feel good at this point. There's a pretty good chance if I win this, I can at least make it into the top 4 or 5. But now starts the story of learning how to mulligan. My opponent plays a tap land, I play one of my 1/1s that make my 1/1, and she plays a Prophetic Prism, drawing a card. I attack for 1 and everything looks good. My opponent goes down to 19, and I have the issue. I need to Village Write my creature, I get my bee, and then I just hope that I get a land off of the top of my cards. And you can see how, like, defeated I am for a second as I just sit there looking at my hand and going, I have to discard to hand size. And I don't think it's that important what I pick. But the thing is, I am learning in this moment that mulliganing is important. I need 2 lands, or I need something aggressive in the beginning. Not only is this start very slow because I don't have my second land, of course, it's even slower because playing a sack outlet and then using a turn to sacrifice it means I'm not aggroing. I am trying to generate card value. My opponent, however, can generate card value with this Glinthawk, bouncing the card that draws a card and then recasting it, which is much better than me killing my own creatures just for the card advantage instead of, you know, attacking, sacrificing, and getting something out of that sacrifice. However, if I can get a land off the top, I can't, so I have to sacrifice my bee to draw another 2 to find the land, but at least I do finally find my second land. But if I could find the land off the top, I could have at least started playing 2 creatures a turn. Now I'm already behind this Glinthawk, but I do play a Nested Shambler, which is my best sacrificial lamb, since, you know, it can make multiple squirrels. But my opponent having more creatures than me is a really bad sign for the early game. And this refurbished familiar is also going to ruin the card advantage I thought I had. My opponent's deck is doing a lot more than it was last time. The Score Kai'Fisher is going to bounce the Prophetic Prism to draw another card, and then I get smacked by a Glinthawk. I am very far behind on board and in hand, which is terrible for my little weird aggro deck. I attack with the Nested Shambler, and my opponent doesn't block, so I give it a Supernatural Stamina because, you know, I want 3 squirrels from it. My opponent takes 3 damage. I take a moment, and then I play my Accursed Marauder, so we both have to sacrifice a creature. I can sacrifice the Nested Shambler, and my opponent chooses to sacrifice the Refurbished Familiar, and I get 3 squirrels out of it. They're supposed to be tapped, but I seem to have forgotten that. At least all of my opponent's creatures are flying, so it doesn't actually matter. The Accursed Marauder was really good here because it both gives me a creature on board and was an enabler for sacrifice. If I had something like a vampire instead, I wouldn't have gained anything out of sacrificing my Nested Shambler. This is a Crack Clan Shaman, and now it has a Toxin Analysis. This is really bad. It can sacrifice an artifact to deal 1 damage to everything, which it did here. And since the Toxin Analysis was played on it, it has lifelink, so my opponent goes up to 21, and I lose my entire board. And then I am put down to 14 by the Flyers. So now I've lost everything, and I'm way behind on mana. I play my Carrion Feeder and my Vampire, so now I have both my Sack Outlets, but all my squirrels just died, so I can't enable them. The Cawgates Shaman also gets Death Touch from the Toxin Analysis, so even if I had these down and they grew beyond the 1 damage, they would still die because Death Touch says any damage is lethal damage. And I still can't block, so the Glinthawk will get in for 2 for free. My out here is having the infinite combo and making both my creatures humongous. I do have a Peregrine Beckoner. I warp it out and then I give my Vampire +2/+0, but my opponent has a Throbbing Charm which deals 4 damage to it. And I think for a second, and then I sacrifice it to the Carrion Feeder to put a +1/+1 counter on it. But even better, I actually have the second Peregrine Beckoner, which then targets the first one, and we've seen this before. I can now infinitely sack both of them, making my Carrion Feeder into a 100,000er. If my opponent hadn't had instant removal here, I would have had 2 giant creatures and could have won the game, which is probably why she only attacked with 1 creature and kept that mana open. So I attack, I trade off I kill the core Skyfisher, and I try to exile both of my Peregrine Beckoner into, the warp zone so they can come back later. My opponent tells me that's not where they go, so I put them into graveyard. Then she tells me they stay in place because they're not warped anymore. They're actually just 4/5s in play now, because they lose the warp effect from being sacrificed. So suddenly I have a very scary board against, just a 2/2 and a little core Skyfisher. My opponent plays a Prophetic Prism, draws a card, and then plays another core Skyfisher to return that to draw more. This deck draws so many cards. My opponent has a lot of life left and can swing in with this Glinthawk and just leave 2 blockers open. She has to block the Carrion Feeder because it's still 100,000 or 100,000. But the 2 Peregrine Beckoners go in and reducing my opponent to 13. And then I play a Mortician's Beetle. But I immediately sacrifice it to draw 2 cards since, I don't think it's gonna grow very big at this point. And I draw another one, so who cares, Now I just have an extra card in hand. That card, by the way, is a land, and I kept it in hand because of this. This is the Refurbished Familiar, making me discard a card. But if I had not kept that land in hand, my opponent would get to draw a card, because if I can't discard, my opponent draws. That's what the Refurbished Familiar say. So I'm very glad I kept that. I'm still the one with the stronger board, even though my opponent is drawing so many cards. I can't even keep up with it in the commentary, and I literally can pause if I want to. Look at this, another card. That's a Compass that also gives my opponent 3 lives, putting her at 16, which is still 2 hits from both the Beckoners, so it's not that bad for me. My opponent only has 3 creatures left, and even though they're flying and can get in, she will have to block the 10,000, 10,000, and then the beckoners can get in, and blocking one of the beckoners is not exactly delaying the clock much either. My opponent gets in for 2, bringing me down to 8, in a second anyway. Yeah, calls Skyfisher attacks and brings me down to 8, and then it's my turn. I have a very simple turn, draw, attack with everything. And she immediately blocks the 10,000, 10,000, losing a Glinthawk in the process. Taking 8, going down to 8. And I'm thinking, you know what? She has to stay defensive now, but she attacks with both, bringing me down to 4. And there's the Galvanic Blast. And that's Pauper. And this is the match where I finally get to learn my lesson. I keep a 1-lander once again. And I play a 1/1 turn 1, which is this infestation stage, thinking if I don't hit the land, at least I can village ride it, draw 2 cards, and I'll still have a creature. Attack for 1, putting my opponent down to 19, I village ride, I draw 2 cards, and just as I predicted, I will get absolutely no lands, and I will have to pass. My opponent very, very happily declares, yes! And I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. Sometimes you're just unlucky, you know? But also, I have to discard to this Refurbished Familiar, but also I'm not unlucky. I'm keeping these hands that don't have aggression on them and don't have lands. And that's my own bad. I really need to be better at mulliganing with this deck. It needs an aggressive start to win. I attack for 1 flying. I don't mind trading with the Refurbished Familiar, but I do need to draw, so I have to village ride to find this second land. I immediately play it. And I immediately play a Mortician's Beetle. Now we have something going. This Mortician's Beetle can grow huge. Oh, it's immediately killed by a Tithing Blade. This is bad. Tithing Blade wouldn't even be that bad because it makes me sacrifice, which is what I want to do. And if I had something next to the Mortician's Beetle, the Mortician Beetle would have grown. My opponent plays another Refurbished Familiar, and I have to discard a creature. And then I get attacked by a Refurbished Familiar in the air, going down to 18. This isn't great, I'm way behind with an aggressive deck, but hopefully maybe I can pull out a combo win of some sort, or I can deal with these Refurbished Familiars in spectacular fashion. First, I play a Nizumi Linebreaker. This is what I need to get back into the game, some sack fodder, and then something to sack to it, which is this Accursed Marauder, making each player sacrifice a creature. And I get my token, which is a mercenary you can tap at sorcery speed to give one of your other creatures +1 attack. Sadly, my opponent used to have all the Refurbished Familiars in the world, and I'm once again forced to throw a creature away. I have made so many kind of 2-for-1s. They're not 2-for-1s because I'm trading with tokens and I'm trading with sack fodder, but it's still negative trades for me in the end. Not to mention, I don't even really want to trade. What I want to do is be aggressive. So I attack in for 4 here, and my opponent can easily block with both the Refurbished Familiars, and then I have nothing left, which she also sees, and promptly goes to block both. I resolve the damage, we both lose everything. The only hope I have is that now I can build up some tempo by playing my Nizumi Linebreaker and a Carrion Feeder, so I have a sack outlet and sack fodder. My opponent plays a Prophetic Prism, which can filter her mana, and then uses it to make red, so she can play this Makeshift Munitions, which is really bad news for me. She can now sacrifice an artifact or a creature to deal 1 damage to anything, and all my creatures have 1 toughness. I play a Nested Shambler, and then I attack for 2. My opponent takes 2. The only good thing for me is my opponent doesn't have that many creatures right now. She has a shit ton of artifacts though most of them are lands. And I also have the Carrion Feeder, so I can put... Oh, that's a Crack Client Shaman. It can sacrifice an artifact to deal 1 damage to all creatures without flying. So it can literally wipe my board whenever it wants to. This is very bad for me. Now I have a play here, but I'm actually not sure whether it's genius or idiotic. Because of all the creatures my opponent wants to kill, the Carrion Feeder is the only one that can grow above 1. So if I offer a trade with the Carrion Feeder to the Crack Client Shaman, she immediately blocks, and I'm thinking if I had a counter, she sacrifices to kill it, so I just trade the damage and I get rid of the Crack Client Shaman. On the other hand, I lose my sack outlet. And then I pass the turn. So while I got rid of the thing that can wipe my board at instant speed, I on the other hand don't have a sack outlet myself anymore. And my opponent still has makeshift munition, so any of her lands or artifacts can just kill one of my creatures. My opponent passes, she's still at a comfortable 15 and only presenting 2 damage, but I'll send them out there anyway. My opponent sacrifices the Tithing Blades to get rid of the Nested Shambler, and I have to consider what I want to do. I can try a Supernatural Stamina for an example, which is what I'm gonna do, but all it does is get rid of this Vault of Whispers and then die before the Supernatural Stamina can resolve. At least I get my cute little squirrel. Well, that's the angry squirrel actually. It's just me, my hand, and my 2 little creatures against 1 makeshift munition, and I'm not sure which is better. My opponent doesn't have anything to put on the board and has to Galvanic Blast my face. I go down to 14, which means if my opponent gets 14 lands or 14 artifacts to sacrifice, then I'm dead. She does play another land, it's tapped. Right now she has the ability to deal, I think, around 6 damage to my face by sacrificing her entire board over 2 turns. So we're kind of in a weird stalemate where I can attack with these 2s, and she has to start sacrificing lands to kill them. She starts with the Nezumi Linebreaker, but decides it's not worth it and takes the 2 damage instead. And I get another Galvanic Blast to the face, putting me down to 10, and now I have to count the artifacts to see how close I am to death from just the lands. The good and bad news is my opponent draws just another land, no core Skyfisher to block with, nothing is standing in my way really, except for 1 makeshift munition. I attack for 2, my opponent goes down to 10, and there is a way I can win this, it's just not very good for me right now. I sacrifice a squirrel to draw 2 cards, and I'm hoping to find some sort of sack outlet or a creature with more than 1 toughness, but all I find is an Infestation Sage. It's still better than the squirrel since it can make a counter creature when it dies. And it's my opponent's turn. She plays a Glinthawk, returning the Prophetic Prism to her hand, which she can then cast to draw another card, and then we start seeing the synergy of this deck I'm up against. Also, this Glinthawk is bigger than both of my creatures, but I warp a Peregrine Beckoner, giving my Infestation Save +2/+0, and if it dies, it comes back, but in response, it's killed by the makeshift munitions by sacrificing a land. However, she's tapped out now, so after I make this token, I have to consider if I want to attack. But all I have is another Infestation Sage, so I can't really attack without just trading poorly. I once again count, see if there's 10 damage. There's a Glinthawk +8, and we argue a little bit about whether I'm dead, because I feel dead. But I'm actually not dead this turn. And while it is looking dire, I do have cards in my hand that can help me get out of this situation right now. And sacrificing my 1/1s to be blocked by a Glinthawk, however, is not the way. So since I'm surviving this turn, all I have to do is pass and not die to a single Glinthawk. I can also block it with the 1/1 flyer, unless she of course sacrifices one of the lands to kill it, but that's still then soaking up at least 1 damage that could go to my face. So it's kind of a complicated board right now. She could kill me if she wasn't limited by her mana, because she has an extra artifact that you can't see on the camera right now. I play my Rite of Consumption, sacrificing the Peregrine Beckoner that was warped. This means I can deal 4 damage to any target and gain 4 life. I shoot the Glinthawk and it dies and I gain 4 life. My opponent had no mana open. If she had had 1 mana open, she could have sacrificed the Glinthawk to deal 1 damage to me or one of my creatures. And then I wouldn't have gained the 4 life. So I attack for 1, putting my opponent down to 9. I have 3 creatures, so I am presenting a clock. Well, my opponent plays a Tithing Blade and I have to sacrifice an Infestation Sage. And there's another Glinthawk, which means she can return the Tithing Blade, cast it again. But I sacrificed the Nezumi Linebreaker and now I still have 3 creatures. They're sadly all smaller than the Glinthawk and she still has 1 mana open. I will buff my bee with my Mercenary and my bee becomes a 2/1, which I attack with. She has to sacrifice one of her artifacts to kill it, because she can't really block with the Glinthawk. She doesn't want to lose it for no reason, or at least not in a trade with a bee. The extra 4 life I gained from the Rite of Consumption is really important right now. My opponent can't kill me just yet and will need some swings with the Glinthawk. However, she transforms something the Tithing Blade, so it becomes a artifact that in her upkeep deals 1 damage to me and gives her 1 life. I find a Bloodthorn Vampire, which I can sacrifice a creature to give it +2/+2 until end of turn. I try to attack for 2, but she sacrifices a land to kill one of my creatures. Oh, actually, yeah, I attacked for 2 with the bee because I buffed it with the mercenary, just like before. And she didn't want to trade with the Glinthawk. So it's basically the same turn, except now I've lost 1 life, and she gains 1 because of the, whatever it's called, the backside of Tithing Blade. She fights another Coarse Skyfisher. These 2/2s and 2/3s are gonna be a problem, because I have none of the creatures that grow. Well, I have the Vampire, but that's kind of terrible, because it only grows for 1 turn. But if I can get in with lethal, if I can get it in for lethal, that doesn't matter. I'll buff my Vampire and attack for 2. There's a Coarse Skyfisher that could block. She could also just sacrifice a land and shoot it, and that's what she'll do. There's 1 damage on the stack that would kill my Bloodthorn Vampire right now, so I want to sacrifice it to itself, because there's no point in saving it right now. And on her turn, I go down to 9, she goes up to 12, and I realize she can just swing in, sacrifice all her lands to the makeshift munition, and I will be dead in no time. I have no more creatures, no way to deal 11 damage, and it's time to scoop it up. However, I'm a stubborn little bastard, and I do want to see what's on top of my deck. Also, it's the last match, so you know, in a competitive match, never give up before you actually know you have no outs. I have no outs right now, but apparently I don't know that yet. I attack for 1. I try to boost it, and it dies very predictably. Play my land, I have an empty hand, and I pass to my opponent, who can just tap 6 mana and kill me. We talk about it for a little bit. It's very fun. She sacrifices 4 lands, putting me to 2, then another one, and I'm dead. And I finally learned I need to keep hands with 2 lands. I'm playing against Melder now, and we will learn why I hate Melder. It's not because of his personality, he's super nice, but I hate playing against White Weenie. I played an Infestation Infestation Sage turn 1. Turn 2, I play a Carrion Feeder and attack for 1. My opponent, Melde, he has a Luminarch thingy, which gains 1 life whenever a creature enters the battlefield under his control. Now the secret is, a lot of creatures will enter the battlefield under his control. He's playing White Weenie, and it's disgusting. He plays a Coarse Skyfisher, returning the Luminarch Veteran to his hand, and then he has a 2/3 which can block my 1/1 and my other 1/1. So it's not exactly super good for me already, as I'm playing a deck, well, not as fast as mine, but also fast, and it likes to make a lot of little chump blockers. And I don't exactly have Trample in my deck. Before it's my turn, I want to sacrifice one of my little guys, get a new little guy, and then draw 2 cards with my Village Rites. This is a deck that really rewards my love for little guys and murdering my own little guys. It's perfect. It's exactly the deck I want to play and have my personality based around. Now, for my next turn, I will play an Infestation Sage and then attack with a tiny little 1/1. My opponent takes a minute to think, realizing that's probably actually a 4/4 if I want it to be, and that Coarse Skyfisher would die. Instead, he just takes the 1. I can play a Village Rite, sacrificing my Infestation Sage, get another little bee, and draw 2 cards, which is amazing for me, because then hopefully I can find some Mortician's Beetles or a Nested Shambler. Those are the cards we're looking for, because those are the cards that accelerate our deck to the sky and beyond. For his turn, my opponent recasts the Luminarian Veteran and passes the turn. Luminarch Veteran. It's such a weird name. I keep thinking of the One Piece characters. I play a Nezumi Linebreaker, which is good because it can make my Carrion Feeder even bigger. And I attack with my Carrion Feeder, which is then blocked. And I sacrifice first 1 little guy to the Carrion Feeder and then a second little guy, making mine a 3/3. And then, while the counter is on the stack, my opponent plays a Trap enchant, choosing the mode where he deals 2 damage for each of his creatures. That's 4 damage on the stack. So even if I sack both of my remaining guys, I will die to the Trap enchant. However, I have this so I can sacrifice my little guy and draw 2 cards. Though losing my Carrion Feeder is terrible, and it also ate one of my other creatures, so I traded terribly there. However, I find the Nested Shambler, which is the 1/1 that can create many 1/1s when it dies. That plus a Paragreed Beckoner or a Supernatural Stamina is the way forward in this matchup. Hopefully I can make more 1/1s than my opponent. My opponent then plane cycles the Eagles of the North, which is a Lord of the Ring cards, just like Lauren revealed, that finds a plane to your hand. It can also be played as a huge creature that buffs your entire board and gives its first strike, and then plays this Chocobo card from the Final Fantasy set. It's a 3/3 Saga creature. Each turn it gives your other creatures +1/+1. +1/+0. Now the difference between my board and my opponent's board is, my opponent's board is bigger, and he doesn't have to sacrifice his own creatures. I am sacrificing them to draw cards. He is a Mortician Beetle finally, so now sacrificing all those creatures will hopefully pay off in a huge little guy. It's weird to have huge little guys. Then I play a Bloodthrone Vampire, which is the sack outlet, and then I can sacrifice my tokens if I want a really big Mortician's Beetle here. For now, I'll use the Mercenary token to buff the Bee token, and then I'll attack with the Nested Shambler, and then I'll attack with the Nested Shambler. If it dies, I get 2 squirrels because it has +1 power. And with the 1 black mana open, my opponent should know that I probably have a Supernatural Stamina, but I don't. And they take 2 for no reason, and I can sacrifice it to draw 2 cards, and because its power was buffed, I get 2 squirrels, and I draw, I said I drew 2 cards, and I get a counter on my Mortician's Beetle. This is really good. Now I have a bunch of tokens, a bunch of cards. It was all part of a little bluff. And I got my opponent down to 18 as well, which is nice. Now I'm threatening with a bunch of creatures and I can make a huge Mortician's Beetle. However, we're going to learn now what the backbone of my opponent's deck is. He takes up the Saga creature of the Chocobo, thinks for a while, and then realizes, the best card in the deck is Battle Screech. This makes 2 1/1s for 4 mana, but it has flashback, tap 3 creatures. So for 4 mana and tapping the 2 creatures you made and another creature, you can make 4 1/1s, which is really good. And also with the Luminite Veteran, my opponent's gonna go back to 22 from making all these creatures. And even worse, next turn they're gonna get buffed by the Chocobo Saga and become 2/1 flyers. I only have a single flyer, so that's a lot of damage in the air I can't really stop. I play a Nested Shambler. I attack with my Vampire and my Mortician's Beetle. These do represent a lot of damage since I have basically 6 creatures. I also buff the Mortician's Beetle, so I can put 6 counters on the Mortician's Beetle, and I can give my Vampire +12/+12. And with all those buffs, it's actually 21 damage if my opponent chose to just not block at all, which I think he realizes as he blocks the Vampire, and he also blocks the Mortician's Beetle with the Chocobo that buffs all his creatures. I start sacrificing first 1 little guy just so my Vampire will survive, making my Mortician's Beetle a 3/3, but I do have to sacrifice a second guy even though I won't get the damage in to make my Mortician's Beetle huge. This kills 2 of my opponent's creatures, and suddenly this board is looking a lot better for me. I have a big Mortician's Beetle, a sack outlet, and I still have 2 tokens and a Nested Shambler. I'm very happy with this board right now. And I also got rid of the Chocobo, so now all those 1/1 flyers are just 1/1 flyers instead of 2/1 flyers. My one problem right now is, even though I have this cool board, my opponent has a huge board as well. And I can attack every turn, and he can just block with 2 guys, and I'll not make much progress in doing damage, but I will get rid of something every turn. My opponent sees that I have the damage advantage, and passes the turn back to me. In his end step, I try to use supernatural stamina on my nested shambler, and then I use a village right to sacrifice it. This will create 3 squirrels, give a counter to my Mytician Beetle, and let me draw 2 cards. I really expected him to have some sort of interaction to get rid of the nested shambler when I tried to give it plus power. Then I sacrifice another squirrel to draw another 2, putting another counter on my Mortician's Beetle. And suddenly you can see just having a Mortician Beetle really makes this deck go a lot faster and be a lot scarier. All those times I've held 1-landers that didn't have a Mortician's Beetle, I've been playing wrong. And then I have a Carrion Feeder, which is a new sack outlet that can also get plus counters. I play it, and then the Thraben Charm comes out. It deals 2 damage per creature my opponent has, which is 8, which means it's 16 damage, and it's a 7/7 right now. I cannot sacrifice my way out of 16 damage, so I'll have to let it die for now, which is sad because it is my biggest creature. However, I have a Carrion Feeder and a Vampire, so I'm still threatening a lot of damage with all my little sack outlets. I sacrifice the Mortician's Beetle to my Vampire to make it bigger, so I can attack this turn. The interesting thing here is that this time my opponent's creatures are just as small as mine, so I consider using my Mercenary to buff something, but every one of my creatures trades equally with my opponent, and I can sacrifice them in response to a block or in any other way. So I'll attack with everything except the Carrion Feeder, because I need to keep that alive no matter what. So if it got massively chump blocked, I would be in trouble. Or if my opponent had another Thraben Charm. The core Skyfisher blocks our 1/1B, and the Luminarch Veteran blocks the Bloodthrone Vampire. The Luminarch Veteran can be cast from the graveyard with Aftermath, Disturb, I forget. There's so many casts from the graveyard keywords now. I think it's Disturb. It comes back as a 2/1 flyer, and when it comes back, instead of whenever a creature comes into play, it gains life. It's whenever a creature you control dies, you gain 1 life. And then I play an Infestation Sage, and then I play a Peregrine Beckoner, giving my Infestation Sage plus 2/0, and if it dies, it comes back tapped. I sacrifice it to the Carrion Feeder, make a 1/1, and then my Peregrine Beckoner becomes warped in the Warp Zone, which is just the Exile Zone, but saying Warp Zone is more fun. For my opponent's turn, they'll use the Disturbed on the Luminarch Veteran to bring it back as a 2/1 flyer. Whenever a creature he controls dies, he gains 1 life, but we already talked about this. And suddenly, our boards are looking pretty even, but if my opponent finds a way to buff their creatures, suddenly we're a lot less even. And he does find another Chocobo Saga creature, which buffs all his creatures' power by 1. It's also a 3/3, so it's bigger than all my little 1/1s. It's gonna make it a lot harder for me to attack from now on. It also means that all those little 1/1 flyers can suddenly deal 8 damage, and that would bring me down to 12. Which is a precarious life total, because if he finds another way to buff them on another turn, I could potentially just straight up die. My opponent does end up attacking with all the flyers. Here we go. I block one of them with my B because they still only have 1 toughness, so we trade them off. And I take 6 damage going to 14. I could make another B by sacrificing my Infestation Sage, but for now I'd rather keep it in case I need to sacrifice it to the Bloodthrone Vampire, because that one only is buffed 1 turn at a time. I play my Warp Peregrine Beckoner. I try to buff my Infestation Sage with +2/+0. If it dies, it comes back tapped. Last turn I did actually bring it back untapped, which was wrong of me. Then I use my Mercenary to buff one of my Carrion Feeder, and then attack with my 3/1 and my 3/3 Carrion Feeder. My opponent can block, but both my creatures will trade with anything he throws in front of them. So he takes a moment. He almost got rid of his flipped Luminarch Veteran, which would mean he had no way to gain life, and I would love that. Instead, the core Skyfisher hops in front. It has a +1/+1 counter, and I'm gonna lie, I missed that. So it is a 3/4, which means my 3/1 doesn't actually kill it. I count how much damage I would be doing, but it's not enough to kill my opponent at this point, because he's at 20 life, so I was very optimistic. My Infestation Sage dies, but comes back. It should be tapped. I keep forgetting to tap them when they come back, and I get a 1/1 flyer. And I put a counter on my Carrion Feeder, I hope, eventually. No, I seem to forget a lot of things right now, so that's terrible. The main difference between our boards is that my opponent's board flies, so he's in control of who blocks what. I can't block when he attacks, but he can block when I attacks. And that's a huge advantage he has, because that means that he can attack with as much damage as he wants and dictate how much of my damage is blocked, whereas, because all my creatures are just 1/1, so we will just trade equally always. He plays an Eagle of the North, and it gives all his creatures +1/+0 and first strike until end of turn. That, alongside the Chocobo Saga, makes all these 1/1s into 3/1s. That's 9 damage in the air so far. And I have a sneaking feeling the Luminarch Veteran will also attack. So that's 4 more damage, for a total of like, I think 13 damage in the air. That was quick math, I'm proud of myself. My opponent considers whether he should attack with the core Skyfisher, but decides because I have 2 pretty big creatures, it could get out of hand pretty quick for him if he doesn't have 3 blockers. And I choose to block the 4/1 with my bee, sacrificing it to my Carrion Feeder so it gets another counter. And I just take the 9 damage going down to 5. Which is, you know, I'm dead next turn. I have no flying blockers. Well, technically I have one if I sacrifice my Infestation Sage. But the problem is that Chocobo will make all those flyers 2/1s. And then I'll be dead anyway, because that's way too much flying damage. So I have to find some sort of kill or a way to save myself this turn. First, I'll use my Mercenary to buff my Vampire, and then I'll attack with all my creatures. Well, all my creatures that can attack. I want to keep 2 squirrels at home because my opponent has 1 creature on the ground, so I could block that with the squirrels. My opponent uses the Chocobo to block the Vampire, and then has to count how much damage is everything else actually on its own. And it's a lot of damage. We have the Paragi Breckner, 2 1/1s, and an unblocked Carrion Feeder. This is difficult math. You have to add several numbers together. This is magic when at its most complicated, when you have to do basic arithmetic. So let's see if my opponent could count correctly. They realize they probably do have to block the Carrion Feeder as well, and the Eagle of the North jumps in front to get killed by a little guy who's huge. And then he also blocks a 1/1 with his core Skyfisher, because why not? The core Skyfisher is a 3/4, and that's a 1/1. So I start sacrificing first to my Vampire so I can make sure it survives trading with the Chocobo. And if I kill the Chocobo, that flying damage also won't be lethal anymore if I have a flying blocker, which I will get by sacrificing my Infestation Sage. So my opponent has to get this block just right. And to me, everything looks great. I'm taking out the Eagles of the North. I'm taking out the Chocobo. And with the bee, I can then block the core Skyfisher. I'm relying right now on my opponent not having seen that the bee is flying. But knowing my opponent, he definitely has. He has the experience in the format to know that what my tokens do. There's the squirrels, there's the one that buffs, and there's the one that flies. And a lot of people lose because they forget what each of those do sometimes. My opponent, however, saw through it. First, he plays a Thraben Inspector, which makes a clue. He can draw a card. He immediately cracks that clue and then plays this sword. This sword is Tyr's something. Great Sword of Tyr. Whenever equipped creature attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it and tap target creature an opponent controls. Target defending player controls. It equips for 1, so my opponent can attack with everything and then put a +1/+1 counter on the flipped Luminarch Veteran. This gives it that 1 extra power, so even if I sacrifice and block the core Skyfisher, there's still 5 damage coming in, and this is GG, sadly. It was closer than I had thought it would be if I had drawn a Rite of Consumption, and if I have gotten my creatures a bit bigger, or a way to make them unblockable, I could have won this match. I still go through the motions because I want you guys to be able to see the killing blows. I feel like that's a part of it that we want. I die to the 5 unblocked flying damage. So far I'm 2-2 in the tournament, so this match will decide whether I go positive or negative in the whole tournament. Well, if I win, I'll have to win another one. I play an Izumi Linebreaker, which is a 1-1 that makes a 1-1 when it dies. My opponent plays a Novice Inspector, which makes a clue when it enters. I attack for 1, my opponent blocks, I sacrifice my 1-1 to draw 2 cards. And I have not learned anything this whole tournament. I once again kept a 1-lander, didn't draw a land off of my sacrifice, and I'm stuck on 1. This is so bad. I've said it before, but not only does this mean I don't have 2 mana on turn 2, it also means that I am killing my first creatures just to try and stay in the game. And I need to learn to mulligan a lot better. My opponent plays a second creature, which connives when it comes into play, which gives it a counter, so it's a 3-2 for 2 mana. I attack for 1, once again I do the village rites, and I draw 2. My deck is also just built wrong, having 6 of those sacrifice effects, while it gives me my land on turn 3. It is too many of those sacrifices instead of having more gas to attack with. Luckily, I do get a Nested Shambler, which is one of the most powerful cards in the deck. If I can get a way to kill that with a Carrion Feeder and have a way to boost its power, like a Supernatural Stamina, suddenly I'll have a lot of squirrels and a very big creature. However, for my opponent's turn, they plane cycle Eagles of the North to find another plane. And I really kind of wish I was playing Thrall of Khazad-dûm, but I'll never actually resolve it with just playing enough lands to play it, so it's not worth having in the deck. My opponent attacks me, I go down to 15, and they play another pair of Novice Inspectors, giving them 3 clues. Their hand is pretty empty by now, but they can just sacrifice those clues and get all those lands right back. I attack for 1. My opponent could block because the creatures are 1/2s, and he does. And I have the Supernatural Stamina, which means we trade. My creature dies, and so does his, but I have to sacrifice it once again to a village rite to find that 3rd land. At least I get 3 squirrels out of it, so I do have enough sack fodder on the board. All I need is a sack outlet or some sort of payoff. My Nested Shambler also comes back into play. My opponent reminds me, and then also reminds me it's supposed to be tapped, which I did wrong all last game. Sadly, I don't find a 3rd land. I have to discard to hand size, and my Carrion Feeder hits the graveyard. It's my opponent's turn. We both have 4 creatures in play, and all those Novice Inspectors, while 1/2s, don't scare me that much unless a Chocobo hits the board. My opponent, however, has to start sacrificing clues to find cards to kill me with. My opponent finds another land, which when it comes into play can give a plus counter to one of his creatures. I forget when it does that, and then he attacks me for a total of 1, 2, 4, 5, 7 damage, putting me down to 8, which is really bad. I need something very powerful very fast, or I'll be dead before this game even got started. My opponent adds another core Skyfisher to the mix, and I'm in terrible shape. However, my opponent doesn't have that much flying power, and my hand is full of good creatures, so I have both the Carrion Feeder and the Mortician's Beetle. I still didn't find a 3rd land, which would be really useful right about now, but hopefully I can keep all the non-flying creatures at bay, and then build up a big enough swing to win the game. My opponent puts +1/+1 counter on the core Skyfisher, and then attacks with everything, even with this board I have. 3 of these damage are unavoidable. I put all of my squirrels in front of all the Thraben collectors, and then I put my Nested Shambler in front of the what is now a 4/3. And then I start sacrificing one by one, putting my counters on my creatures just in case my opponent has a Throbbing Charm and wants to remove one of my creatures in response to one of the sacks. It's better to resolve each trigger individually, making sure the creature is as big as possible before you put the next counter on. If you actually said I sacrifice all of them at the same time, I talked to a judge about this, then it still counts the same way because the normal way to do it is the way I did it. So saying I sacrifice all of them is just a shortcut to do the same as what I just did, which kind of blew my mind when I learned that a little bit. I have a sideboard card, which is Vampiric Lin, which is an enchantment that gives my Mortician Beetle lifelink, and that's the way I can stay in this game. This huge creature swinging and gaining me life, but there's the Throbbing Charm. Well, it's not Throbbing Charm, it's just a removal spell. My Mortician's Beetle die, and I can't gain life, and I scoop it up. It's the end of the video. So the deck didn't do amazing. 2-3 isn't the result, you want for a tournament, but it's fine, honestly. I didn't understand how aggressive this deck went and how aggressively you should mulligan to get a powerful hand. But I really like the deck, honestly. It's fun to play. It feels like it doesn't have that many decisions compared to other decks, but you do have to play pretty tight and you have to maybe cut some flings. I feel like there's a lot of fiddling you can do with this deck to make it yours. And I love it. But mostly that's just because I love black. Anyways, like, subscribe, especially if you made it this far into the video. You deserve a medal and an ice cream. Go get yourself an ice cream. Or if you're on a diet, a cucumber. They make for a great snack. Anyways, bye!